Hello and welcome to this character workshop following on from the work that we've done on Gorboduc. Gorboduc is a nice, cheerful, happy play full of the joy of spring, indeed. It is the earliest shall we say, proper tragedies that we have, and it is full of lamentably tragic action of full blownness. We did a read through in 3 sessions, which are the videos of which are available on YouTube now, but this session we're going to be looking at character, and specifically we're going to be looking at the character of Videna, the queen and wife to Queen Gorboduc. She appears specifically in explicitly in terms of dialogue in 2 scenes. She might be lingering in the background in other scenes as well. And thankfully, we're starting at the beginning of the play so that I don't have to do any additional background as to what's going on, because hopefully it will explain it. These workshops are an attempt to start working towards doing at this stage, an audio production of this play, as well as looking ahead to doing a live theatrical version when such things are once again possible. Guiding us through the text today is this wonderful team of readers. So, reading as our primary Videna today is...
Hello, my name is Sascha Cooper, and I'm a professional actress, dancer, and all-round performer in Brighton in the UK.
And reading as our primary Ferrex today is...
Alexandra. I too act professionally.
And also supporting and potentially reading as alternative voices today, we have Stephen. Stephen, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm a scholar of early modern drama based in Lancaster in the UK.
And also we have Greg. Greg, introduce yourself.
I am Greg, and I'm based in Berkshire.
And finally, we have Veronica as well. Veronica, do introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Veronica, and I'm based in London.
And I am your host, Robert Crighton. I'm going to do occasional impressions of being a director, but I tend to keep these things relatively light, so I wouldn't copy any of my suggestions in real life. So we're starting off, as I say, with the first primary scene of the play. The play, first performed in 1561, originally opens with a dumb show involving a selection of sticks and how easy it is to break them. But it then moves on into this scene. We're just going to read through the scene in a fairly light way now to get a sense of it and start asking questions before we take it apart in more detail. So if I could ask Sascha and Alexandra to read the scene with Videna and Ferrex.
The silent night that brings the quiet pause from painful travails of the weary day prolongs my careful thoughts and makes me blame the slow Aurora that so for love or shame doth long delay to show her blushing face, and now the day renews my griefful plaint.
My gracious mother, my gracious lady and mother dear, pardon my grief for your so grieved mind, to ask what cause so tormenteth your heart.
So great a wrong, and so unjust despite, without all cause against all course of kind.
Such causeless wrong and so unjust despite may have redress, or at the least revenge.
Neither, my son. Such is the froward will, the person such my mishap and thine.
Mine? Know I none, but grief for your distresses.
Yes, mine for thine, my son. A father? No. In kind a father, but not in kindliness.
My father, why? I know nothing at all wherein I have misdone unto his grace.
Therefore the more unkind to thee and me, for knowing well, my son, the tender love that I have ever borne and bear to thee. He grieved thereat is not content alone, to spoil thee of my sight, my chiefest joys, but thee of my birth right and heritage, causeless, unkindly, and in wrongful wise. Against all law and right he will bereave. Half of his kingdom he will give away.
To whom?
Even to Ferrex his younger son, whose growing pride I do sore suspect, that being raised to equal rule with thee, methinks I see his envious heart so well to swell, filled with disdain and with ambitious pride, the end the gods do know, whose altars I full oft have made in vain of cattle slain, to send the sacred smoke to heaven's throne, for thee, my son, if things do so succeed, as now my jealous mind misdemeaneth sore.
Madam, leave care and careful plaint for me. Just hath my father been to every wight. His first injustice he will not extend to me, I trust, that give no cause thereof. My brother's pride shall hurt himself, not me.
So grant the gods, but yet thy father so have firmly fixed his unmoved mind, that plaints and prayers can no whit avail. For those have I essayed, but even this day he will endeavour to procure assent of all his council to his fond device.
Their ancestors from race to race have borne true faith to my forefathers, and their seed, I trust they equal bear the like to me.
There resteth all. But if they fail thereof, and if the end bring forth an ill success on them, and theirs the mischief shall befall, so I pray the gods requite it them, and so they will. For so is wont to be when lords and trusted rulers under kings, to please the present fancy of the prince, with wrong transpose, the course of governments, murders, mischiefs, or civil sword at length, or mutual treason, or a just revenge, when right succeeding line returns again by Jove's just judgment and deserved wrath, brings them to cruel and reproachful death, and roots their names and kindreds from the earth.
Mother, content you. You shall see the end.
The end? Thy end, I fear. Jove, end me first.
And thus ends that first scene. It's interesting, you know, between the first time we read this and the other day. Some of you were here, some of you weren't. It was interesting because we were working on quite a corrupt version of the text, which I have upgraded somewhat. There's only one typo that I've noticed, and that's a misplaced "so" in Ferrex first speech there, to ask what cause tormenteth so your heart. It should be the "so" is on the wrong side of tormenteth. Alexandra, just note that for the future. Everything else, apart from a plural joy, which I'm questioning, because when it was first published, it was in quite a corrupt version, and I think that's what we did, basically.
Yeah.
And then there was an upgraded version printed a little after that, which creates all sorts of questions and issues. So there is you have a word choice, Videna, or with ambitious pride. You can. It says in the margin there, you can have hope instead of pride if you'd like.
Okay.
And we'll question that. Okay, so what's going on in the scene? What's going on? Talk to me, people.
Okay. So the main thing that is happening for Videna, she's getting very upset at this point. You know, she's suspicious of her husband. She's suspicious of everything that is about to happen, especially with who he's got in mind for the throne and who gets what. And she's worried about what's going to happen with the other son. It's clear she's got a reasonably good relationship with Ferrex in this scene from the language that she uses, but it's the other one that she worries about. She's certainly got her own views on Gorboduc, especially when she says, a father? No, in kind a father, but not in kindness, which suggests she doesn't view his personality in a good way. And the other son, the other son, Porrex, she mentions, she suspects he's too egotistical, the pride, whose growing pride I do so suspect. There's a talk of both sons equally ruling, but she senses danger, basically. So this is her getting in a state, so to speak. I think she's getting more, as the speeches go, as the conversation goes on, she's getting more and more and more and more into an state, and she worries that Ferrex is going to be the one who gets killed in all this. So yeah, she's doing a very strong motherly duty, so to speak, of worrying, but obviously for those who don't know the text, when they first see this, they probably think, is she over worrying here? Is she doing a typical female thing? But obviously, as it goes along, we see her unsettlement is quite just in this instance as well.
Well, I mean, certainly for the first audience, and maybe for the audience today, the idea of, it's, you naturally would give your kingdom to the eldest son who is in the room at this time, and the opening up the franchise to the younger son is unusual. It's not something you do, and splitting a kingdom tends not to go well. Alexandra has a thought there.
Yes, this is perfectly normal, and I use the word sparingly, for the audience watching this at the time. Primogeniture is not necessarily how things have always been done or how things should be done. And there is a tradition in Britain, potentially, quite probably of Britain at the time that this is purporting to be historically, of other ways of sort of arranging for inheritance. So, the idea that you would divide your kingdom between your sons seems wrong and unnatural to the audience of the time, but is something that would have been done, or that had been done historically, and worked all right historically for some time. But what's interesting to me relating to this is that this is the first scene in the play. So, we have to, its purpose is, of course, to introduce the characters as well as the plot. And the thing I find interesting is Videna knows more than her son, the purported heir to the throne. She is already aware of Gorboduc's plans, which we are going to hear in the next scene. And so there's a clear delineation of the relationships already, simply because of who is telling whom what. So Videna has got this news, and she is passing it on to her favorite son, possibly her only son, because they refer to Porrex as his other son, but never as hers. And yes, that Ferrex is getting this news from his mother, not his father, and so on. It establishes those relationships quite quickly.
Very quickly.
Yeah, but that's quite weird if it's his younger son is not her son. The other way around would make sense.
Well, it would be weird if we think of it from the perspective of the audience at the time, Christianity and monogamy. But if we look further back, historically, neither of those things was always there. And so it would be perfectly possible that Gorboduc has more than one wife. We just don't see the others.
Okay. So I'm just thinking about that. Other thoughts? How old is Ferrex? How old is Porrex? How old do we want them to be?
Well, given the fact that Ferrex is the younger son, and if we're talking historically...
Ferrex is the older.
Oh, is he? Oh, sorry, older, yeah. So, if he is the older, I'm just trying to think of when they would have been of age, so to speak, back then. And I know they were very, very young at time of power. I mean, I know the youngest monarch at one point to reign, I think, must have been about certainly at least 9 years old, but then they would have had counselors and all that kind of stuff. But
9 months old, Henry VI.
yeah, oh, that was it months? Was it months rather than
9
years?
months old, Henry VI. 9 years old, Richard II.
That was it. That's the one I was thinking of. But I know there was a 9-year-old somewhere along the line as well. But if we think historically, I mean, Ferrex technically would have been very likely about, at the youngest, I would say 13, or maybe the oldest, 13, 14, possibly. If we're talking the youngest son, probably about 3 years younger, at a guess. But would that then relate to modern day? I don't know. Don't think so, very likely.
I think I go to suggest that they're probably older, just simply otherwise the narrative won't function later on into play. They could, but the creating some sense of an age range. It's that question of what's going on between the two, between Videna and Ferrex here. Is he in his 20s or is he a teenager? If that is perhaps a better way of suggesting it.
Yeah.
The text doesn't seem to give us any clues in that direction, does it? I mean, I'm not just thinking of this scene.
I'm to some degree, I'm suggesting we just make a decision at this stage. Sure. Where do we feel? But we'll make that decision as we go along. Let's go through this text line by line, unless there's some additional thoughts at this early juncture, because it's not a long scene. There's not a lot of data to be playing around with. Let's go through this speech by speech and line by line and see what comes out. So, Videna, from the top, please.
The silent night that brings the quiet pause from painful travails of the weary day prolongs my careful thoughts, and makes me blame the slow aurora that so for love or shame doth long delay to show her blushing face, and now the day renews my griefful plaint. So
it's been a sleepless night. Oh, he says, the delay of, you want the sun to rise, but it's only in the last line it suggests that it is perhaps just dawning now, but the rest of it suggests sort of the middle of the night. And when we're talking about the aurora, we're not talking about the aurora, we're talking about the rising sun, which creates a stage image which we can play around with in terms of lighting. That creates this nice slow dawn. I really like that, and quiet pause creates a sense of a mood. But all of the words throughout this in isolation: painful, griefful. The day is blushing, and I know that's perhaps just red sky and morning, but there's also the suggestion that there's perhaps shame in there as well. And just clues about the pace of this. I think it's possibly it feels quite slow, and just the tone that we're playing around with. Other thoughts about just those lines? Anything leaping out at you?
I think plaint gives us a big clue, doesn't it?
Mm.
Complaint. There's a sort of standard rhetoric associated with it. There's a kind of sense of a deeply disturbed but prolonged state of mind behind it, and so I think the word plaint is setting us up for what's to come in terms of the complexity of some of those sentences. I mean, some of them we've got sort of paragraph long sentences, and one of the things that I was sort of wondering when we were going through it was the tension between the sort of what seems to be very, very powerful emotions and there's a sort of rhetorical complexity with which they are expressed, especially, and there's, it seems to have been set up as well to give us a contrast between Videna and Ferrex, because Ferrex is doing 1 line, 2 line,
Yeah.
and immediately is picked up by Videna. So I think there's a kind of setup there, which is the cliche of why silent nights are good and they're nice and quiet. And then we've got a twist, prolongs my careful thoughts. And then it takes ages to get round to the idea that it's near the end of that night. But it gives us a sense of where we're going to go with it. I think it gives us a sense of sort of rhetorical tone, if you like, which is, you know, kind of being paid by the word sort of thing, you know.
I'd agree with that actually as well. And to add to that, if we look at her mindset, taking advantage of what you've very aptly said there. If we're looking at word journeys, what strikes me is painful travails of the weary day for me. And that, if we put it in layman's terms, it almost suggests, you know, like how we've mentioned earlier, a potential sleepless night, tossing and turning, this whole, you know, because she's got this great responsibility on her shoulders, this thought, and, you know, prolongs my careful thoughts. I mean, like she's been having to be careful of what she's thinking, saying, maybe it's wrong, in fact she thinks this way, but there's so much going on with her that it's almost like she's just taken this emotional responsibility on her shoulders, and the careful thoughts seem to have slipped into these carefully chosen words. You know, like again, like you've correctly said, plaint, blushing face.
Yeah, there's a sense, because we're talking about painful travails of the weary day. I'm just getting this image that Videna has spent the day trying to argue with the king against what they're doing, and then at night, well, there's no more arguing to be done, so it all becomes internal. She's up all night, she's pacing, and Ferrex is still and trying to stop her, and that's why he's the one interjecting. In a sense, maybe Videna is more like we get in Act 4, is almost a monologue of thought, perhaps.
Yeah,
and that Ferrex is the one trying to pull her back.
She's stuck. I think there's a sort of, she's on the same level all the way through this. I think, you know, she doesn't go anywhere. She starts in a kind of in a blocked state, and then she's just blocking everything that Ferrex says from where she is. And so the kind of impression that you're getting from the scene is, you know, this is not somebody, you know, this is not somebody who's got a plan, or somebody, you know, this is not one of those sort of powerful queens who says, you know, here, my son, this is how we handle this. And so it's, you know, there's something almost choric about the way in which she just hits that level and goes, it's going to be awful.
Yeah. Disaster.
No, it's really going to be awful. No, I'm telling you, it's going to be awful.
Yeah. I agree with that as well, especially as, again, the block. Look, you don't, it's almost like she's saying, look, you don't understand. This is going to happen. Listen to me. You know, it's this, you know, it's like that when you get it into your head, if you're having a panic attack or something like that, and you get all these thoughts in your head and you can't get rid of them. It's denial, but not quite, if that makes sense.
And that makes the dialogue with Ferrex much more dynamic, because you're trying, you know, Ferrex is to some degree trying to say, well, what's the problem? Because you could argue actually Ferrex already knows all of this, but is just simply playing the game, or just trying to, is it still this, or, you know, I don't know yet until we attack the rest of the text. But it's just that Videna just keeps going on and it's, you've got to convince him, because he's going to die if you don't convince him. You've got to have something at stake there.
Yeah.
Not just internally, but also with the other person on stage.
So the question is, why doesn't Ferrex listen?
Well, to begin with, he's actually trying to find out what's going on, and she's not telling him directly. So to begin with, he is listening very intently. And then eventually she gets to the point where she says, look, this is what's going to happen. This is why I'm worrying. It's because your father is planning to give away half his kingdom. To who? To your younger brother. Oh, don't worry about that. You know, so he goes from what's wrong? What's tormenting you? You know, a causeless wrong. Right, tell me more about this. What's going on? What's going on? So he's initially trying to dig into her state of mind, and then once he finds out the cause of it, I think that's when that new information probably makes him sort of go, no, that's okay. He's not a threat.
Excellent. Let's move into this this back and forth dialogue. Let's just run the My Gracious Lady onwards and see what comes out of that. We got an awful lot out of 6 lines, so I'm quite impressed.
My gracious lady and mother dear, pardon my grief for your so grieved mind, to ask what cause tormenteth so your heart.
So great a wrong, and so unjust despite, without all cause, against all course of kind.
Such causeless wrong, and so unjust despite, may have redress, or at the least revenge.
Neither, my son. Such is the froward will, the person such my mishap and thine.
Mine I know none, but grief for your distresses.
Yes, mine, for thine, my son. A father? No. In kind a father, but not in kindliness.
My father, why? I know no thing at all wherein I have misdone unto his grace.
We'll just pause there. There's a really nice. I really like the fact Videna's going, you know, without all cause, you know, unjust despite, and Ferrex clearly using those words back. That's a really nice mirroring use of language there. I really like that. Ferrex, do you have? Did you get the? Do you have distresses? I've only got distress in my text.
I have distresses.
Did you download the new version from the Dropbox?
No.
Robert, just go.
Yeah. Yes, Greg.
I had a very strong image, and it may not play out, but I had a very strong image of almost Videna being found at prayer at the start. Almost, because that, just those words, it's almost like she's been at it since she left the court the day before, or the king the day before. And actually, though they are very painful, they're actually quite quiet to me, that first speech. And Ferrex does approach her with care.
Yeah. Yes, I think you're right. It doesn't feel like it's animated with pacing in that kind of way. It feels much closer. Maybe we should run it almost like it's whispered to each other, you know, because you don't want to be too loud first thing in the morning, do you? You don't start having a shouting or being too loud at dawn, because, you know, everyone's asleep.
And the use of the word plaint almost as the last line in that last word just made me think of it as a sort of, yeah.
Oh, I like that. I think that's a way to try it. I like that. Other thoughts from that? Just that little back and forth. You know, the question of my father. You know, a father. You know, he's not a father, and it's like Ferrex is going, have you been keeping problems with Daddy from me?
It all deconstructs at that point, doesn't it? I mean, in terms of the lines, you know, she's so fluent up to that point. You know, neither is froward will, the person such my mishap. You know, it's all very, very controlled, and it all kind of falls to bits in that single line. Yes, mine for thine. And then she introduces the crucial piece of information, because it's all been so generic. You know, Ferrex is going, okay, I'm hearing you. And she goes, father, but she's still, you know, she's still not telling us, and she's still not Ferrex. But it just kind of stops dead. And then there's 3 words, but that could be, you know, that's 2 separate lines, isn't it? You know, so that if you think about it as verse kind of flowing on, I think you'd be missing some opportunities if we just flowed right over that bit.
Yeah, that line feels like it could be. You could play the pacing on that and beats in there all sorts of ways. You can really hold on to that. I think Stephen's absolutely right there. Same with Ferrex's response. You know, my father, why? I know nothing at all. You can really play with the rhythms there, and how long you hold it. And if it is quite a close knit scene at this point, it's almost like, you know, when Videna, you know, it's almost like you've turned and just holding Ferrex, such my mishap and thine. And Ferrex is quite disingenuous, and is pushing away, pulling. There's sort of interesting possibilities there in how to physically do that. Obviously, we can't do that here, but those ideas are really interesting.
Yeah, there's an interesting question as to how much of a secret this is that Videna is revealing. You know, because it could be that she's found this out. However, you know, in whatever manner, she's found out this information that she shouldn't know, because the king is about to consult with his counselors and only then announce it to his sons. So, you know, it's possible that actually she's, you know, overheard or some other way found this out, and it's eating her inside.
Yeah.
Because she can't go to Gorboduc and say, "You idiot, why are you doing this?" And she can't, and she shouldn't. She does eventually tell her son, but, you know, she's not supposed to.
So
which explains the controlledness of the lines.
Yeah, it's a secret. I'm up. You know, at what point does she give in to telling the secret? Yes, that works. I like that.
And also, what are the stakes to, you know, why can she not just come out and say it? You know, what are the consequences is my question.
Or maybe it pains her too much to say it to his face. Or what she's thinking. I don't know. I feel like their interaction reveals how physically close they are.
And that maybe when she next sorry, Veronica, sorry.
No, I was just saying, like, the way that you were saying that the phrases play off each other, like you can imagine them being actually very physically close as they're speaking.
But also
that would explain why she's unable to tell him, because like just looking at him is so upsetting.
But also that Videna, it almost feels like Videna then breaks away when she goes into her next speech, which we're about to look at. Then, I've almost feel I've blocked this for your suggestions alone. I've got a blocking scheme now. This is great.
That's good.
That saves half an hour rehearsal further down the line. Kneel there, you join, kneel down, conversation, you get up and move away. He has to follow you. That's half the scene blocked. Marvellous. And then we'll do it later and it won't work.
Actually, the thing about being at prayer might work really well, because at the end of the scene she goes back to that as a theme.
She does, doesn't she? Actually, good point.
Okay, let's move forward to Videna's speechette. Let's go through that.
Therefore, the more unkind to thee and me, but knowing well, my son, the tender love that I have ever borne and bear to thee, he grieved thereat is not content alone to spoil thee of my sight, my chiefest joys, but thee of thy birthright and heritage, causeless, unkindly, and in wrongful wise, against all law and right he will bereave. Half of his kingdom he will give away.
Lovely. I think that's going to be grieved rather than grieved. Thereat.
Grieved?
I don't think there's an accent on that one.
That's fine.
He grieved. Yeah. Also, the question is, I think it's joy singular. My chief is joy.
I've got joys in this script.
Yeah. No, that's I think the final typo, as it were, in this particular bit of the text.
It's joy. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
because it does change the meaning. You know, it's about, you know, he is your chiefest joy seems to make sense there.
Yeah.
And
You
then
would
it's
think,
about
wouldn't you?
him, and maybe actually it's still quite close. Actually, that there isn't a move away because this actually feels very intimate,
Mm.
and it's about her love for her, for the eldest son.
Mm.
And I'm going to move away from the possibility that they're different children.
That they are children to different mothers.
Yeah.
Could I, before
Simply
you do
because
that-
what happens in Act 4, it has
Yeah.
more impact if they are
Sure.
both her children, and also
True.
creates this question of having a favourite.
Yeah.
I think.
Before
this
we move
stage.
away from that completely, I'd just like to qualify it with something that would be recognizable to the audience at the time, because that's why it got me thinking of polygamy. The Ottoman Empire was a thing that was going on around about that time, and the way that worked was that, in terms of succession, was that the Sultan would have however many wives who have however many sons, and then when the time comes for the next person to succeed because the Sultan's dead, it was basically a competition. It was who can get there first and who can take control first, and so all the mothers would spend the Sultan's lifetime basically promoting their son to be favorite, to have a better chance of succeeding. And I think this is the kind of connection that might be either being suggested or might be made in the mind of an audience member. This idea that they've heard of, that in other places they do this savage thing where, you know, different sons kind of either rule together or which has also happened, or have to compete for who has to be king, and how unnatural and how abnormal this is compared to us who have this perfectly logical succession of magnetic primogeniture.
Mm.
So I think that might be a not necessarily a reference, but a potential mental connection.
Mm-hmm.
Just going back into the speech, I wonder, did anybody else think that we've actually had something new here in terms of why she's so upset? Because she said a couple of times, "Your mishap is my mishap."
Yeah.
And you can sort of read that as, well, this is the mother, you know, being upset for the son. And then she starts it by saying, no, he's actually doing it to get at me. And that's the sense, or there's a double sense in which it's her mishap. She says, knowing the tender love I have ever borne, he's not content to do this, but he's doing this. So is that a new thing? Because I was sort of reading my mishap and thine. You can read that as very sort of dutiful mother, you know, your problem is my problem. Is there a different dynamic? I've not read the play, have I? Well, not for ages. So have we got a different dynamic here, which is, you know, this is actually a bit more personal than we might have picked up first off?
Well, that's a really good question to follow up. They don't interact, Gorboduc and his wife, but you don't. But the fact that they never are on stage at the same time, or at least in any effectual sense, suggests that there is a split, and that there is a different dynamic also going on here, and that's a really interesting.
A little bit more like what Alex was saying, really.
Yeah.
You know, which is the mother's power base, or the mother's relation with the father here.
Is through the son. I also have a question following up on what Stephen just pointed out. He grieved thereat at the thing that, at the tender love that I have for you, is not content alone to spoil thee of my sight, but also spoil thee of your heritage. So
Frozen.
I think you're frozen there for Alexandra.
Is here by they're not actually allowed to see each other. You know, is this a Morsi? Sorry?
Sorry, you'll have to say all that again. You froze.
I do apologize. So I was quoting in support of what Stephen just pointed out. I was quoting the section where Videna says, paraphrasing, that grieved at the love I bear for you, my son, he is not content alone to spoil thee of my sight, but also spoil thee of your heritage. Is there something we've missed here whereby Videna and Ferrex are actually not supposed to see each other?
I think there's a, you know, that this is a stolen moment. That's a really nice idea.
I was, funnily enough, yeah, and you do wonder, actually, following on what the dynamic is generally with the two boys and what Gorboduc has in mind, because if then in that case, if Videna is not supposed to see Ferrex, then that just makes me wonder, especially with the following scenes that we see Gorboduc, etc. in. We wonder, I do wonder whether there's something else going on within that relationship that has not been mentioned at all. And I don't seem to remember anything being mentioned in the text about there being some kind of discrepancy within that marriage. But you do wonder, don't you, that dynamic, whether it's a nasty dynamic and whether you can relate it in a modern context to somebody who's having to stay in a loveless marriage to a partner who is not exactly the best person in the world. You wonder what sort of games are being played behind closed doors if that is then the case.
It'll be interesting as we go forward to see what the character of Gorboduc is himself, who similarly isn't on stage for all that much. Stephen, did you have a thought there?
Well, no, I was just thinking it's really useful for us as performers to think about that, but it feels a bit first drafty in the sense that if you'd really wanted to set this scene up rather than just hint at it, you could have done that quite easily. And this is kind of in the middle of a speech that we hear that you know, she's not supposed to see him, and it would have worked so well as a kind of, you know, a stolen, surreptitious, dangerous moment. That's why she's so general. It's really dangerous. But it's through the text. I don't think it's set up so that the text takes us there. I think it's a hint for us as performers about.
Yeah.
The text doesn't seem to as Stephen said, to do much with that, but it doesn't mean we can't do things with it. Certainly, I don't think necessarily the audience will be able to communicate that to an audience, but it might help us build more of the world. But we've talked about this play as being like snapshots in action. That, you know, there's a much wider series of events going on around this play, and we're only catching little flashes of moments. And that in staging it, we might like to use more dumb show and projection and video and things to paint other images of what's going on here, and that, you know, maybe there's almost a photo montage of Videna's relationship with Gorboduc and her sons and the difficulties and you know, or the hurts or the slights, or, you know, that a royal couple has semi in public. So it's that's a really interesting question. Okay, so we lost Stephen.
Yeah, he wandered off.
And yeah, so these are all sort of questions to bear in mind if there's additional evidence for this later on, that we can at least build more of a possible with. Okay, moving forward, I'm sort of saying this quite slowly to see if he comes back. We'll move on to the next exchanges. I think we'll go do the next half page, I think. And play around with this, because Ferrex has that little response, to whom I think we'll run this down to fond device or devise, depending on the edition.
Yep.
And he's back.
He is indeed. So Ferrex, to whom, and then Videna onwards.
To whom?
Even to Porrex, his younger son, whose growing pride I do sore suspect, that been raised to equal rule with thee. Methinks I see his envious heart to swell, filled with disdain and with ambitious pride. The end the gods do know, whose altars I full oft have made in vain of cattle slain, to send the sacred smoke to heaven's throne, for thee, my son, if things do so succeed, as now my jealous mind misdeemeth sore.
Madam, leave care and careful plaint for me. Just hath my father been to every wight. His first injustice he will not extend to me, I trust, that give no cause thereof. My brother's pride shall hurt himself, not me.
So grant the gods, but yet thy father so hath firmly fixed his unmoved mind, that plaints and prayers can do no whit avail, for those have I essayed. But even this day he will endeavour to procure assent of all his council to his fond device.
Okay, but just pause there because there's lots of things came up in that because we were talking about if she's praying, but of course what we get really quite explicitly, of course, it's gods, cattle slain. So it's a question of what gods are, which gods is she praying to? It's clearly a pre-Christian civilization, and mother, leave care and caneful plaint for me. I mean, it's almost like, yes, put the entrails down, mother.
And she's getting more and more wound up as she's going along, isn't she?
So if she's got a ritualistic thing that she's doing, that it's not just kneeling or something passive, that there's something being tossed onto fire and creating jets of, that there's a ritual action occurring with some of her text.
Maybe a sense of incense too going on.
Yeah, I was going to say incense. And didn't they used to do, if we're talking about ancient times, there were certain herbs that were used for prophecies.
Yes.
Could she well have been actually throwing something in order to create a vision, possibly?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, is for our stage picture, or at least to give the impression, if we're just talking sound, what is, if she is praying and maybe there is a ritualistic element to what's happening here, we need to construct that for the audience as well, and it also gives the actor something to do. It's not quite going to the drinks cabinet for another brandy, but it's that sort of equivalent. It gives you something to do with your hands.
I think it's possible that she's praying to female deities.
Yes.
Because at the beginning it's mentioning all these female symbols with the night and the dawn.
I'd agree with that, actually.
Yeah.
And especially if this is set for Christianity, they did have gods and goddesses, so it makes perfect sense.
Yes, and I do think that the line, "Madam, leave care and careful plaint for me," as opposed to me, is not about, oh, stop worrying about that, let me worry about it. It's, can you stop doing ritual things?
Yes,
on
stop
my
what you're
behalf?
doing, breathe.
Yeah, stop worrying and stop doing this thing.
Yes, if my brother's prideful, he will, that's his problem. I'll be fine. I trust. The very open words with Ferrex there. I trust.
Yeah, my father's been just. He won't be unjust to me, I trust. That give no cause. The idea of it being causeless has already been mentioned, but for some reason Ferrex thinks cause has anything to do with it. Could say it's a cause and effect process.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my brother's pride will hurt him, not me. Is, again, it's enormously trusting for the first scene in a play.
I won't repeat my statement about this time.
No, it's fine. And then, of course, we get Videna moving into a little bit, even this day, even this, it's happening now. I think there's an urgency to that, isn't there? He's going to go to the council any second now, or, in about 16 lines' time. It's going to happen. Okay, let's finish this sequence to the end of the scene. Ferrex. So yes, she said that they're going to go to he's going to the councillors any second now.
Their ancestors from race to race have borne true faith to my forefathers and their seed. I trust they equal bear the like to me.
Bear restive all. But if they fail thereof, and if the end bring forth an ill success on them, and theirs the mischief shall befall, so I pray the gods requite it them. And so they will, for so is wont to be, when lords and trusted rulers under kings, to please the present fancy of the prince, with wrong transpose the cause of governance, murders, mischief, or civil sword at length, or mutual treason, or just a revenge, when right succeeding line returns again, by Jove's just judgment and deserved wrath, brings them to cruel and reproachful death, and root their names and kindreds from the earth.
Mother, content you. You shall see the end.
The end? Thy end, I fear. Jove, end me first.
And yeah, she's not giving up on the prayers, is she? And just getting trapped in her own examples, never-ending
Paranoia.
ors.
It's paranoia with a vengeance, isn't it? She's just getting so worked up and worked up and worked. I tell you what's interesting, even pace-wise, from the very top of that scene, from it being slow, it's getting faster, faster, faster. It's like emotionally, it's seriously, as I'm reading it, I'm not joking, my heart is pounding as I'm reading this. It's just wound up, wound up, wound up, wound up. What if? It's like this constant what if in her head. You know, I've got to protect my son. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. It's like this.
You know, again, taking the clues from that of, you know, feeling like, you know, it's the dawn. We have the, you know, light. As a lighting designer, I'm thinking, okay, everything's very red and orange, and then as the scene ends, the sun has come up. So everything starts hushed and intense and close, and then by the end, everything's much more demonstrative.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
Yeah, Stephen.
I'm just wondering if there's an you know, the possibility of another switch here, which is to kind of to move her out of that repetition and try and suggest in some way that she's actually one, that on some level she actually does know what's going to happen, which would fit with this kind of vibe that people are talking about, but that it started to sound to me like a curse. So I pray the gods requite it them. What's going to happen? This is what I think is going to happen. And we end up with Jove's just judgment and deserved wrath brings them to, you know, I'm just imagining she might actually be quite pleased about all of this because she knows something dreadful is going to happen. And there's a bit of her which is just totally stressed, which is kind of obviously the way we go into it. But I wonder if there's a bit of a reversal there, which is also, it's not just, oh, I'm so stressed with this situation I can't do anything about, but we kind of shift a level up and take advantage if we're going to go down that sort of slightly more supernatural route.
Which makes more sense for her monologue later.
Well, it gives you a switch, doesn't it? Rather than, you know, as you were saying, you sort of feel like you kind of repeat. And the end, thy end, I fear. You know, she might as well know what's happening, because actually these aren't just fears. It is going to happen.
Well,
she's not stressed about that. She's kind of, no, this is actually what's going to happen, and I am so angry about all of this.
It's a question of Ferrex. What does Ferrex mean by the end? Mother content you, you shall see the end. The end of what?
You'll see how this goes. So my kind of reading of what Videna says is Ferrex has just said, you know, oh, the counselors, I trust the counselors will be, you know, will give me what is right, what is just. And Videna responds with, but if they fail, the consequences will be on their heads. And I hope the gods help with that as well, because this is what always happens when misrule occurs, and it goes to an enormous kind of nationwide problem until the right succeeding line returns by Jove's judgment. and roots them out. And so Ferrex is going, look, you're going to see how this is going to go down. You'll see that it's not going to go down the way you describe it. So the end, in my understanding, is the end of this sequence of events that you, Videna, have taken from what's actually going to happen to what you think might happen. You'll see what actually happens. It'll be fine. He's going to consult with them. They will say, you're stupid, Your Majesty, give it to just your son, because they always have done. And, the hypothetical situation that you have constructed is not going to happen, and you'll see what really happens.
And so we get that playful, well, I say playful, but the play with words, the end, that you're seeing thy end, and then Jove end me first. It's I don't know if anyone's seen Rome, the HBO television series. When Lindsay Duncan goes completely off the rails and does the sitting outside the house, sort of praying and fasting until her bitter enemy comes out, and then she kills herself in front of her. When the moment everyone mentioned cursing at that point in that speech, it suddenly felt very like that. The calling upon the gods to revenge if it all goes down badly.
They're the same gods.
Yeah.
Aurora
they
and
are
Jove
indeed.
are Roman gods.
Very much.
Any additional thoughts about this scene? That's the scene in its entirety, as it were. Alexandra.
In opposition to, I can't remember if it was Stephen or Greg who said that Videna reads quite sort of monorhythmic in this, or on a single journey. I get the impression that there's actually quite a lot of change in her if we go on the basis of there being something that she's been worrying about that she doesn't want to speak about, or she's not allowed to, whatever the reason might be. Something that she can't talk about, but she feels intensely, then going into hint, okay, I'll tell you, this is what the problem is. Not being taken seriously enough, her worry not being taken as a genuine danger, and so having to sort of justify it, and therefore justify herself, and then going into the cosmic side of things of, I've been praying, it hasn't been working, but I hope that the gods are on the side of right, because I think this is going to go very badly. This is the hypothetical situation that I've constructed, and if it does go that way, curses upon them, etc., etc. I think that there's an opportunity there, particularly for a character that we don't see a lot of hereafter, for one thing, to establish to round her out, but for another also, I think it's a great opportunity done well to create stakes for the entire rest of the play through how seriously she is taking this and through how she presents it. Or how she, rather than presenting it, it's through how, what she's living through in these 2 pages could be enormous. And I think if directed in that direction, it sets us up really, really beautifully for the rest of the play.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the thing actually with all of the characters is none of them are on for very long. I mean, in many ways, Videna is one of the most well laid out. In fact, possibly the only fully laid out character in a sense of having multiple scenes and this kind of inner life. So possibly Ferrex is a close second. I don't feel we'll find out as we go through some of the other characters. I'm going to have to say we're going to move forward to Act 4, Scene 1, because I want to go through at least all of Videna's text, ideally with some level of detail. So that much as I'd like to go back and run all of that with some intent, I kind of want to we look at the rest of Videna's material, as it were. So bad things have happened. Sorry, Stephen?
Could you give us a page number, please?
Page 29, if your pagination is the same as mine. It should be in that order of
About 20 or 20. I think it's 27 on mine.
Yeah, so it might be. It depends on how your page, the header or bottomer on your page lays out the page.
Thank you.
So lots of bad things have happened. I think it's fair to say, because we've lost Ferrex. Ferrex has been killed by Porrex. So Videna is not unreasonably upset. I should note for everyone that there are random paragraph breaks in this text. They are random. They were just to make it slightly easier to read the text. I headed for full stops where there were reasonable breaks. They are not indicative of meaning. So take your time and play around. And I'll just say, Videna, let's just do the first page or so. I'll pause you. We won't run the whole thing. Let's get a sense of where this. I may pause you earlier. Let's see where it goes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Let's just worry about accuracy and hunting for things, but give whatever performance you feel. It's entirely up to you.
Okay. Why should I live and linger forth my time in longer life to double my distress? O me, most woeful wight, whom no mishap long ere this day could have bereaved hence. Mought not these hands by fortune or by fate have pierced this breast and life with iron reft? Who in this palace here, where I so long have spent my days, could not that happy hour once have happed, in which these huggy frames with death by fall might have oppressed me? Or should this not most hard and cruel soil so oft where I have pressed my wretched steps, sometime had Ruth of mine a cursed life to rend in twain and swallow me therein? So had my bones possessed now in peace their happy grave within the closed ground, and greedy worms had gnawed this pinned hind heart without my feeling pain. So should not now this living breast remain the ruthful tomb, wherein my heart yielded to death is graved, nor dreary thoughts with pangs of pining grief my doleful mind had not afflicted thus. O my beloved son, O my sweet child, my dear Ferrex, my joy, my life's delight, is my well-beloved son, is my sweet child, my dear Ferrex, my joy, my life's delight, murdered with cruel death. O hated wretch! O heinous traitor, both to heaven and earth! Thou, Porrex, thou this damned deed hast wrought. Thou, Porrex, thou shalt dearly buy the same. Traitor to kin and kind, to sire and me, to thine own flesh, and traitor to thyself. The gods on thee in hell shall wreak their wrath, and here in earth this hand shall take revenge on thee, Porrex, both false and caitiff right. If after blood, so eager were thy first and murderous mind had so possessed thee, if such heart of rock and stony flint lived in thy breast, that nothing else could like thy cruel tyrant's thought but death and blood, wild savage beasts mought not their slaughter serve to feed thy greedy will, and in the midst of their entrails to stain thy deadly hands with blood deserved, and drink thereof thy fill?
And we'll just
All in-
pause there. Yes, we do have. It turns up a couple of times in the play. It is. I think it's just hugey. It's huge, but
Is it
it's even. It's even more huge. I think, unless I'm being very very wrong there.
Yeah, because I've not known how the hell to pronounce it. Is it Hoogie? Hoogie?
No, I think it's just hugey.
Hugey.
I don't know. I think it's one to ask Donald Trump on the pronunciation for that.
No comment.
They sometimes do that. Massey is another one that they do sometimes.
Yeah, I mean it's a fascinating word. I quite like it. It's just it's interesting following on directly from that first scene, looking at this here, because we have the sort of setup of she's not fully explaining her grief, but we know she is grieving. To the release where it is very explicitly stated, and then to cursing. And if we link this to a different kind of cursing to what, if there's still something attached to what happened in scene 1, but this is it even further. We don't want to shoot our bolt in Act 1, but we want to hint at what's coming here in Act 4. If it was incense and ritual, here it's knives and blood, and it's there's something much darker, even darker here. Thoughts about that first half of the speech?
Well, the language is enacting the curse, isn't it? It's sort of giving us pictures of sort of blood and slaughter and wild animals and eating them, drinking blood, and so it's kind of it's giving us a sort of completely different emotional register to the first curse, which was much more general and much less what's the word? Visceral, literally. So it's the equivalent of sort of chucking sort of horrible things into a potion pot, bits of meat or something like that. It's completely another level, but all through the language. So she's moved away from sort of socio-political abstractions into sort of tearing wild animals apart with your teeth or something,
And it's that connection with thy greedy will as well. So it's not just the flesh and blood and slaughter. It's it's feeding on from the previous death. You started this, so we have to keep feeding with more death and more blood and more. It's that blood calls out for blood, which I think turns up in the text several times.
It does, yeah.
Greedy worms. We got greedy at least twice.
Pining twice, Ruth twice.
Yeah.
Probably more.
Yeah. Pining heart, pining grief, pangs. It should be noted it's a different writer, or at least we think it's a different writer. It's two people wrote it, and it's believed the first 3 acts were one, and Act 4 and 5 was the other. Of course, goodness only knows. Alexandra.
In direct relation to that, to this being basically the very first bit of the second writer's work, what struck me is that her first few lines are an echo of her last line in the last time we saw her. She finished by saying, "Jove end me first," and she starts by saying, "Why did I not die first?"
Yeah.
And I really liked that, and adding on the fact that this is a different writer, it's that they clearly picked up really well from each other, or worked together in tandem really well. Go ahead.
No. Continue your thought. I will wait.
I just wanted to revise my previous statement, because later on in the speech she does actually mention that the other son is her son too. I hadn't. That's one thing that I hadn't caught the previous time. But what is interesting to me is that the way in which she described. So she takes a path from death back to her. Oh, I thought. 1 second. Sorry, I was reading Tuma's womb. So she basically she roots back through the last few things that she said in the previous scene sequentially. From I should have died first through these dreary thoughts, these pangs of grief, and then actually allowing that to flow out reflects the way in which in the other scene, similarly, she wasn't letting her feelings out, until she did. But yes, the thing that struck me was that thing I mentioned about, her starting with, why did I not die yet? Why did I not die first?
And the stage direction says enter Videna sola. But there is the question of do we throw our body on stage, or even if it's to be revealed midway through that speech, as we've uncovered so far, or is it what do we do with this this solo speech? How do we play with this? Rather than just as text and someone on stage, or do we just leave it as it is? What thoughts?
Or is Ferrex visible, potentially interactable with, potentially not? But is perchance because he's the one who gets addressed with thou a lot. Ferrex is more in the third person. She refers to Ferrex more in the third person, but Ferrex more in the second. Thus far.
It depends whether she kills him midway through this scene.
It's true.
She hasn't has she specifically said she's going to kill him yet?
No.
Thou this damned deed hast wrought, thou shalt dearly buy the same. So the thought is there at least.
Yeah, so we haven't quite got there yet.
Yeah, I was going to say she doesn't physically do it at this point. She's thinking about it though.
Mm. But no, the idea of that he could be there and that we slightly twist the scene so that we actually see it at the end, and that he's just a punching bag. That's an interesting idea, Stephen.
I like the idea of him sort of Tarantino-ish. He's sort of tied to the chair and she's just going around him. I thought that there was a lovely moment in the performance there where there's a sort of elemental breakdown on "Oh my beloved," sort of whatever the hell that bit of text is doing. "Oh my beloved son, oh my sweet child," and she sort of rises from those flames as this sort of terrifying figure. I think there's such a contrast between doleful distress and moping about the place and why hasn't the earth swallowed me up, because if the earth had swallowed me up then my heart would be doing this and my head would be doing that. It's fairly standard, and in a sense the revengey stuff is fairly standard, but there's this, it came out really strongly in the performance. There's this sort of 4 or 5 lines which is a total breakdown away from all of that. The language completely changes, even the repetition kind of works like that, this completely loses all of that, and that does something to her. So I could see that working as a sort of 3-part structure, or a 2-part structure, but with this kind of amazing change up in the middle, which comes out of the inarticulacy, which comes out of the pain, all the stuff that was there in the performance, but which is absolutely forges something terrifying.
I've got that marked as sort of a bridge piece between what's before and what's after in my notes, and that does seem to be the pivot, doesn't it? I think that's a very good point.
That way you went to "Oh heinous traitor," I thought that worked really, really well in the performance, I thought.
Other thoughts about this first half of the speech?
I wonder how far you want to go with the idea that it was her favoritism and her hatred for the other son that caused this tragedy to happen in the first place, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mhm.
And so like her negative emotions against Porrex, how horrible do you want them to be voiced out? Because there's a difference between hating him because he killed her son, or really hating him and then he killed her son. So
or for that matter, you know, as you were saying about guilt, that you
yeah,
know she is to some degree, you know, complicit in this situation
yeah,
by favouring one son above the other.
yeah, yeah.
Because
Yeah,
you know,
that makes
daddy
sense.
liked the younger, and
Yes.
she liked the older, and
And whether
that's
that physically manifested through this curse that she tries to do, I I don't know. Like her hatred for the son kind of carried over, and then she got punished. But yeah.
Alexandra.
Historical context. Daddy liked the youngest of the sons, Mummy liked the eldest, and there was a whole issue as to which one of them or which of the many sons should rule. Henry II. It's just brought that to mind, specifically the play The Lion in Winter, but the historical context as well, because the Normans didn't go by direct primogeniture. You know, it was instituted once they established themselves in Britain. It was instituted more and more, but it's not something that traditionally would have been the way. So there's another connection there that that people might know from their history or from I don't know, potentially other stories, other plays of the period. This aspect of it not being, they keep mentioning how unnatural these events are, because they are unnatural, of course, to the viewer. Obviously, you know, people killing their own children, yes, but in terms of the succession and this thing of the king dividing his kingdom, we as we come back to that, I've just realized there's a much closer link, which is Henry II as a storytelling example, but surely there are other events that people would have recognized or known about, as I say, historically.
Well,
That
yeah,
dynamic
Stephen.
plays out with
Agreed.
bastards as well.
Sorry, say again, Stephen.
I said that dynamic plays out with bastards as well in all sorts of plays.
Yes.
I mean, you know, you can be legit and younger, or you can be a bastard, but it's the same sort of emotional dynamic in terms of inheritance and parental love.
There's also an element of the text that we don't have anymore, but we know existed, which we didn't bring up last time we went through it. So we know from an account of the performance that there were scenes to do with a potential marriage being arranged, possibly with the surviving Porrex. It's not really clear, which would have direct hint, nudge, nudge, Queen, perhaps you'd like to get married, Liz, moment. And so one of the dumb shows is slightly different, or slightly different in meaning. One of the choruses seems to have been explicitly changed, and there may be a missing scene.
Right.
But explicitly is all about the potential, a potential match for Elizabeth. And there's a whole propagandizing element there, which is completely absent from the printed text.
Now that's interesting,
And
because
that's something we'll definitely come up with in more detail and during one of the other character sessions. It's not really applicable on this one.
still very interesting though to know that there could have been certain scenes deleted, which would give a completely different slant on what we're doing as well.
The idea is that initial performance before the Queen Elizabeth, the second performance for Elizabeth was very, very, very pointed.
Yeah. Of course.
So let's finish this speech before we wind down the session. So we have got into, in fact, we're pretty much mid flow of this particular thought, as we're throwing about the continuing blood calling on blood. If after blood, so eager were thy thirst. Or if you want this, or if you want that, we continue with, or if naught else.
Or if naught else but death, blood of man, mought please thy lust, could none in Britain land, whose heart be torn out of his loving breast with thine own hand, or work what death thou wouldst suffice to make a sacrifice to appease that deadly mind and murderous thought in thee, that he who in the self-same womb was wrapped where thou in dismal hour receivest life, who if needs thy hand must slaughter make, wouldst thou not have reached a mortal wound, and with thy sword have pierced this cursed womb, that the accursed Ferrex brought to life, and given me a just reward therefore? So, Ferrex, yet sweet life might have enjoyed, and to his aged father comfort brought, with some young son in whom they both might live. But whereunto waste I this ruthful speech to thee that hast thy brother's blood thus shed? Shall I still think that from this womb thou sprang, that I thee bear, or take thee for my son? No, traitor, no. I thee refuse for mine. Murderer, I thee renounce. Thou art not mine. Never, O wretch, this womb conceived thee, nor never bode I painful throes for thee. Changeling to me thou art, and not my child, nor to no wight that spark of pity knew. Ruthless, unkind monster of nature's work, thou never sucked the milk of woman's breast, but from thy birth the cruel tiger's teats have nursed thee, nor yet of flesh and blood formed is thy heart, but of hard iron wrought, and wild and desert woods bred thee to life. And canst thou hope to scrape my just revenge, or that these hands will not be wroke on thee? Dost thou not know that Ferrex's mother lives, that loved him more dearly than herself? And doth she live, and is not venged on thee?
Well, I say lovely. Lovely material there. I pointed out last time. I think it's worth repeating. It's interesting that you effectively separate yourself from your son, that you other him as something that has nothing to do with you, to make it easier to do what you intend to do. And I think that's fascinating psychologically.
Absolutely. And you know what? Sorry, go on.
Yes, and just a note to typo 5 lines. From the bottom, it should be scape rather than scrape. It was, that's clearly wrong.
Okay.
My spider sense tingled. I didn't even need to look at that to go, no, that's clearly not what that's supposed to be. And that's so Ferrex. That's so. You gave it such a nice, decisive, like a decision has been made on that so. Even if it hasn't been fully articulated yet. It's a question for performance whether we change the morts to might in the same way as what we do with eeks or eckers, whether we just change them to alsos. There are a few slightly archaic words that we might make that decision editorially to just lightly modernize. But I don't know. Sometimes I quite like. So it seems to be quite random in my mind. Ones that I'm tempted to change. Thoughts about where that whole that second half of the speech goes?
This is clearly, for me, when I read it, the whole speech is a gradual descent into madness. And that second half of the speech, especially when she makes that switch, to separate herself, I find that quite a strong choice for her. And funnily enough, it did get me wondering about the psychology in this instance, because, with things like PTSD and any other kind of mental illness, like a sociopath mindset, they to get to that point, if you're going to be that cold about your own son and make that instant switch, there's always something in the brain that if you live with something long enough, it becomes a reality. And for her, it's almost like a light switched on. And for me, it's very, if we want a modern reference, Dexter, if anybody remembers that series of Dexter, when he kills his victims, he's very methodical about it. He's, in a way, flippant. And depending on how we do this and direct it, the whole thing with that madness descent, do we do it so that it's an immediate switch so that it becomes blatantly obvious? Or if you play it underplayed, like Dexter does, and that whole thing of, well, actually, it's such a subtle switch that it creeps up on the audience. And for her, it just feels natural. She's thrown all decorum out of the window, so to speak. It's just so enjoyable. I shouldn't really say this, but it's so enjoyable to read.
I wondered, because it's easy to say things like madness, but if I was thinking of it as more a disassociative state and actually a self-induced one, that she's deliberately trying to distance herself from it, and that's the state that she's aiming for at the end, consciously or unconsciously, that she doesn't want to feel that hurt anymore, and that journey there. Other thoughts in the room? Stephen?
I wonder if we could look at it another way, which is the play is about inheritance, and this sounds like a disinheritance, in the sense that the connection to the body of the mother, sort of a connection to the property of the father, connection to the body of the mother, they're both kind of symbolic in a way. It's not just about the goods and things that you inherit, but it's about some kind of placement. And this isn't just a cancellation, although it is a bit like a cancellation. But there's an element of, if inheritance involves honor, this involves some kind of shaming, in the sense of, okay, she doesn't have any physical power like a king has got, but what can she do? She can do this to you. And the sort of rarity of that sort of thing happening, perhaps in a patriarchal world, perhaps, when it comes down to it, how many mothers are going to do that, I think gives it, it's not so much a curse as in the sense that it's not something that she's saying. It's actually, it's what she's doing. It's an act.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And so that, we could go back to some of the lines we've gone along with this before, which is to do with, well, it's to do with the power of women in this particular world.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
And so, in a sense, I can see maybe there's a room for, more than one thing going on here.
And and also, Stephen, in a way, it is a sort of referral to the madness aspect. And when I say madness, I don't mean insane crazy. But you can see with her journey, this is a deliberate choice. And I would agree with you there. It's what can she do in that circumstance to, in her mind, put things to right. But it's still, to the outside world, you do question her stability, mind-wise, at the time. And it just shows what grief can do, pushing you to that extreme, which is why I kind of thought the Dexter element of that sociopath or psychopath, in a way, comes into it, because the dynamic changes through that speech. She becomes then so methodical, in a way, with her approach. It's almost subtle. It's uncomfortable, but yet, okay, right, what's happening here? Instability.
What I find really interesting.
Also, Alexandra.
No, Stephen was speaking.
There's an element of Medea in it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a direct parallel to that in the dumb show just before this moment. Actually, Medea even gets named. What I was going to say, what I find really interesting is the logical journey that she makes in terms of the argument, the process of the argument that takes her to where she needs to get to. So in the second half of the speech, she says, if you really wanted to kill somebody, why not me? And at least then I would have had my just reward for bringing you to life. And so Ferrex might have enjoyed his life and, done the natural thing of had his own son, etc., etc. But this element of I change, murderer, I thee renounce, thou art not mine, thou art a changeling and a monster. I never even fed you milk. This is clearly what happened didn't happen. You are some sort of unnatural creature, and I, as Ferrex's mother, will take revenge on you.
On you. Yeah.
So
it's
the entire process is constructed step by step to alienate, or as Robert said, to disassociate, to other him, to cast him out of the family, kind of her conception of family, specifically so as to justify that last moment of, not only will I take revenge on you because I loved him, I will take revenge on you because I am his mother and not yours.
Yeah. That block immediately, I agree.
And if we did go full Tarantino on it, that would be the moment when the knife comes out and the poor person in the and blackout.
Funnily enough.
Greg, Veronica, any thoughts also just about the rest of the speech as well as this second half?
Well, yeah, no, I agree with the disassociation comment, because she even then goes to refer to herself as third person. So I'm not even sure if she's saying I like the mother of Ferrex, more than like displacing herself completely and talking about Ferrex's mother as another entity than her at that moment.
Yeah.
Adding to the mindset aspect as well.
Then yeah, I mean, I'm trying to figure it out, but I can't. But there's some obvious like pagan imagery in the last paragraph with this child and what he's going through that's making him an inhuman changeling child. But I don't know the significance of the tiger's teats or desert woods or Ironheart.
Is that a sort of Romulus and Remus thing?
Oh yeah, okay.
I don't know. I'm just maybe or similar to.
Yeah.
I'm not going to put my any money on that one, but
no. I wish I read
it would have
ahead,
been wolves. It would have been.
Oh, it would have been wolves. Yeah.
If it was Romulus and Remus.
Yeah.
There's also there's also potentially, I mean, I think there are flavors and hints to all sorts of other, like there's lots of Greek tragedy going on, you know, beyond Medea. The Orestia comes to mind, but
especially with the dawn at the beginning.
Yes.
But there's possibly also a very well concealed Christian hint of the casting out of the son who killed his brother. You know, the sort of Cain situation. Yeah. Which they don't mention directly because it's set in a world with other deities and they're consistent co-authors.
Yeah. I mean, I think the overall point I'd like to make about both these scenes, in fact, the play as a whole, I mean, you know, when you pick up the text, you sort of see these big blocks of speeches and you think, my God, this is this epic never-endingness of it all. But actually, it's incredibly concise most of the time in its image, you know, its thoughts. You know, that first scene moves, you know, it goes through an awful lot of material very quickly. And the journey here, yes, you can cut it. But there isn't really there isn't that much in here where I'm going, you know, there's wasted material or this is too long. You know, this is a journey, this speech, and it's very well constructed. You know, and that's not just because, you know, it's a horrific idea that's being played out before us, but you know, we get the full character's journey. And you know, and again, potential for how we decide to stage it. We've got all sorts of possibilities here, even though it could just be done with one person wandering on stage. General thoughts before we wind up on our queen. We don't see her again per se, but she is assumed murdered by the populace. For her terrible crimes.
I think there's a potential relationship with an audience in performance here. I think, you know, the fact that she's a queen is not just a matter necessarily of her individual psychology, but her behaving in a public space, which is this space of the inns or wherever you imagine this happening. And that fits into I think you know, people have been mentioning the sort of echoes of Greek tragedy. I think that sort of sense of some of the things that she's saying and doing in saying here are about public. What's the word? Public acts appropriate to a queen. So I think that, you know, the way that she speaks, it's we're not in sort of fourth wall territory here, I don't think. I think that, you know, some of this rhetoric has the potential to reach out to an audience in performance. And I think, you know, there's an interesting kind of tension between doing it with sound, where it kind of has to be, a lot of it has to be inside somebody's head, and the way you would imagine it working out, where, you know, all sorts of kind of graphic and visceral public rituals can start to happen.
Yes, it's interesting how many long, you know, soliloquies, speeches in plays don't work very well as audio, because actually they require the theatrical relationship to carry your interest, and that something gets weirdly lost, whereas scenes and dialogue survive much better. Other final thoughts?
Apart from the fact that she's a challenge to play, I think I've said this before, she's definitely one of the most interesting characters to work with. You know, in terms of the classical texts that we've looked at, she's yeah, I think a lot of interesting stuff could be got out of it, and a lot more work needs to obviously be done acting wise on getting to the core of it. I think we only touched the surface today.
Oh
But
yeah, I deliberately kept it surface today. Actually, I thought, if we're going to start acting it, we're going to be here for a very long time because there's
true.
and it's going to be quite draining. So I thought, let's keep it light.
Yeah, and it's quite agree. But even so, even when doing it, I just want to feed back in the sense that although yes, we were touching the surface today, I felt playing her, it got me thinking of, it actually got me to understand her a lot more, and and actually start to have a proper look at her journey as well, which is not always something you get to do in a normal play reading context. So I just want to say this is actually a really nice way of starting the journey. So well done, Robert. Good thought in putting off this type of workshop.
Thank you. What I like is I now have 4 pieces of paper covered in notes, all of which are a direction of travel in terms of turning this into different kinds of shows. Some of them contradictory, but that's always the you want a text that allows different actors to approach it in a slightly different way, even if the central conceit is there. It's got enough going on here, even though it's doing quite specific things, that we can push it and pull it around a bit. Any other final thoughts, or should we? No. I saw. There was a moment I thought a light bulb was going to go off, and it didn't. Okay.
It was just me sort of nodding along to what you were saying, because I agree that as a whole play, it gives a lot of directorial opportunity. It might not seem that way because it looks like massive blocks of text, but actually you've got choices and you've got things that you can bring to the fore, and you've got levels of how this can be constructed. How big do you want these characters to be? Do you want them to be sort of playing this out on a cosmic level, or do you want it to be small scale family drama? And you can eat it in one way or another. And what I thought was interesting with Videna in that context is that you could construct her as this epic Greek sort of representation of a woman, or you could go very, very small and very human and this speech is something that allows that, that really illustrates how that can be allowed in both directions. You can have this very big internal drama externalized in performance, or you can I guess through that relationship with the audience, make it so much about this one person and this one person's internal conflict and suffering, and the way in which she resolves the cognitive dissonance is by denying one of her sons so she can revenge the other. Which is something as an audience we need to get that across, and it's either because she is so extraordinary, or it's because she is so
I don't know what just happened there. I have literally no idea just what just happened.
Everything just literally froze, and it was just like on so, and I was like,
yeah. Alexandra froze on so, and then and then Mike, it just crashed. My end.
Yeah,
so this has happened before. It's still recording, so that's fine. So I think I'm just going to take the opportunity now to close this recording after that unfortunate break. We'll never find out what Alexandra was saying at the end.
She's back.
Hello,
sorry.
Alexandra.
Hello. I do apologise for that dramatic mic drop moment.
It's all right. We all went.
Oh, right. Okay.
So
yeah. I was saying something great.
Excellent. So on that note, on that bombshell and that technical hitch, I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank everyone for coming back so that we can say goodbye.
Bye-bye.